Good afternoon. Maybe I'm using the microphone because of the live streaming. We're in quite an intimate surrounding today at Parasite. So welcome to the second day of our second session of Hong Kong Spring's program of events and interventions. Yesterday at the Hong Kong University we had two introductions by Natasha Ilic from Zagreb, who, departing from the motto of the Art East map project of the Slovenian group Irwin, history is not given, it has to be constructed, led us through the work of several artists from different contexts and from different generations who deal in their practice with issues of memory, of historiography, and of defining one's present from this interpretation of the past. And the second presentation by Tony Chakar, an artist from Beirut, who had a complex double presentation on issues of representation, of position of one speaking, of construction of roles, and of political identities. Today we will have 4 guests. We will have an informal session of screenings that was curated by the speakers of the day, and at the end we will have a plenary session where, together with the speakers of yesterday and of today, we will try to carry a conversation based on what was presented. I'd like to invite all of you to, stay with us the whole afternoon to participate in a plenary discussion. We will give the possibility after each intervention to ask maybe 1 or 2 short questions, but it would also be better to keep all the questions for the end of the day to have a more concentrated discussion. So I'd like to invite Venus Lau, the co-curator of this project, to introduce the first speaker of the day.
The first speaker for today's session is Hoonjin Kim. Hoonjin is a curator and writer who worked for the 7th Gwangju Biennial in 2008, and she also worked for a lot of art institutions, including Van der Beek Museum, and then also Gallery 27. And then she worked on a number of titles, including the one that she has written for Gao Shiqiang and published by Time Zone 8, and also a book for He Yang too. And then she also contributes to a number of art publications, including Issue, Art Asia Pacific, and Art and Culture. So a little bit like a short note today. So actually, if you have the program in your hand, we actually, that for these 3 weeks, we have a relative loose structure of themes and contents. And this week we have writing recent or urgent histories. But instead of only, with speakers talking about, a certain period of time in a certain place in the art circle of a certain city, we actually have our speakers talking more about the construction of histories and also historicity, and also different concepts of temporalities and how it affects our practice. So we have Hoonjin start today.
Hello everyone. I'm going to read some text that I prepared for today, and then I present one of my exhibition in the relation of what I want to discuss in terms of contemporary as archaic relation. History is an open text, not a closed book, which can always be reinterpreted or reapproached in terms of how it is related to the present. Also, our passage from the present to the future is always begotten from what remains from the past. Thus, the project of writing urgent recent history has less to do with documenting or recording the past than with writing about how we wish it to orient our present and future. It is in asking this question about the past that contemporaneous will reveal itself, and the question propels the present forward. What is then contemporary? Much like what is art, it is essentially a contested question. Answers made among those who constitute the contemporary according to their varying goals and orientations. For some, the contemporary is simply a temporal concept or the present period that anyone is living. For others, it may be simply a receptacle that contains all the different phenomena of the times in which we live, including the different arguments about its definition. In fact, the ambiguity and uncertainty and the inconsistency surrounding the concept of contemporary can also be witnessed today in the variety or diversity of competing practices that are taking place in the name of contemporary art. Indeed, today's art scene is reminiscent of the era of a warring state of ancient China. It is circa 426 and 221 BC. I guess you must know well about this history. An era dominated not by a single unified power, but rather a dozen of relatively equal but competing small countries. What we witness is not simply the coexistence of various perspectives and artistic mood and choices. We find the splicing of what seem to be different layers of history, and we find that the past is altered and recomposed, and that significant contemporary tendency come from them. The variety of situations I encountered through the research trip in last years gave me an opportunity to put real face. I'm going to talk about a little joke found in a contemporary scene from now on. By the name of contemporary art, the current swing between progress and regression. I met a gallerist in Tokyo who proudly showed me a Van Gogh-style landscape painting of an artist while making no distinction whatsoever between him and others who would more generally be understood as contemporary artists. This was happening on one of my research trips to the Tokyo for Biennale. Also in Caracas, in the main building of National Gallery of Art, Caracas, Venezuela, there is a special exhibition hall dedicated to the showing the leisure time drawing of the exhibition guard working at the gallery. So there's a guard exhibition actually positioned inside of the National Gallery as one of the important exhibitions. A special hall was a result of a populist project pursued by dictatorial Chavez gallery. I guess you know the Chavez government. It's a dictatorship government, but also it's a totally populistic agenda. It has a totally populistic agenda. So they kind of did a lot, bring the new agenda to the National Museum or the gallery, National Gallery. So bring more populistic layers and then policies inside of the institution. In Seoul, during my work with one of the new private institutions founded by one of heavy industry corporation, the director warned me not to use the term laboratory because it sounds politically the left-oriented. This case brings me to mind again that living in the same current time does not mean the same as living in the same contemporaneous. Another disturbing scene is found inside the heart of our world like China and India, the scene profiled by the neoliberal topology of the art market. I would say that is in the scene that baffle our belief on the genuinely progressive as well as the critical nature of art. Two powerful emerging economies where the art market have also grew explosively in the past 10 years. In Beijing, I saw artwork being produced entirely as a labor-intensive commodities with monumental or symbolic or illustrative gesture as a painting or sculpture. And in this situation, art studio become a veritable busy art factories. I had to face the return of the ghost Orientalism in this scene. What I saw in the phenomena was the submersion of artists resistant in Asia for the past 20 to 30 years. Also artists in other third world too, who had been refraining from turning their art into the the other's craft, namely post-colonial project. I mean, I believe that there is many artists who are resistant about this kind of crafty production, who serve sort of Asian quality of labor-intensive product in terms of art making, that has been really resisted during last 20 years. But in a way, in current time, we're sort of facing again this problematic scene through these Chinese and Indian new market emergence. This absurd scene run by new emerging market is even influential to most Asian region whose art history have great achievement in so much that many of artists have not much hesitation to serve their art as a consumerist thing. As we see these instances, while we live in the same current time, people neither live through the same time nor experiences light and darkness in the same way. This would be common sense that contemporary does not mean simply living in the same time frame. However, if we still see the term contemporary is still abused, we must miss something in thinking of contemporary. What is the contemporary? In discussing the concept of contemporary here, I would like to turn to Giorgio Agamben's notion of contemporaneous. Contemporaneous is then singular relationship with one's own time, which adhere to it and at the same time keeps a distance from it. More precisely, it is that relationship with time that adhere to it through a disjunction and an anachronism. Those who coincide too well with the epoch, those who are perfectly tied to it in every respect, are not contemporaries, precisely because they do not manage to see it. They're not able to firmly hold their gaze on it. The contemporary is a person who perceives the darkness of his time as something that concerns him, as something that never ceases to engage him. Darkness is something that, more than any light, turns directly to singularly towards him. The contemporary is the one whose eyes are struck by the beam of darkness that comes from his own time. This urgency is untimelessness, the anachronism that permits us to grasp our time in the form of too soon, that is also too late, of an already that is also not yet. According to Agamben, the contemporary is ultimately defined by the person who lived the contemporary. To him, the contemporary person is not someone who is passive and not someone who coincides too well with the epoch, but someone who fully and actively traverses their time by choosing to exercise their sovereign right. Agamben further explained that contemporary person is not someone who bakes in the glorious sunshine of their time, but someone who is more sensitive to its shadow and darkness, and someone who tries to bring light into the darkness. These two characteristics of the contemporary, as defined by Agamben, are also applicable to the pioneering and therefore untimely achievement made in the progress of veritable human history. The landscape of today's globalism, in a positive sense, arrives out of the regional network that connects the evolutionary phenomenon of mutually different cultures. In last several years, China and India have attracted attention to the art world with their economic prowess, while more recently, Middle East and North Africa have drawn attention because of the political changes taking place there. Globalization since the 1990s dismantled the first world hegemony of the 20th century, and it has opened a new democratic and pluralistic horizon of visual art culture. This is an encouraging change. However, where such attention made by economic impact or geopolitical importance, there is a possible problem. The art became a tool for cultural marketing, and it abandoned its duty to the true meaning of the contemporary, that is, discord with its general trend of its era. In this situation, the different form of anachronism today also have become more complex than ever. What is considered an artistic phenomenon that is too late in one region is considered too soon in another. Given this situation, an artistic practices in historical development as well as in a critical language that is too late should be criticized as such in any locality. However, to take such a position is to risk being called a cultural supremacist or someone who does not recognize cultural relativity. From the perspective of the advocates of multiculturalism, global multiculturalism, or cultural diversity, this is certainly not a politically correct position to take. This might be the common sense, like there's a sort of, what I see is that there's sort of highly afraidness to talking about kind of the actual phases of multiculturalism, the problem of multiculturalism. Thus, in the name of multiculturalism, double or triple standards are applied in the evaluating artistic practices in different localities without speculation whether the artwork or visual language found with a new fashion is estimated as a literal anachronism or ideal anachronism in terms of the contemporary. Like literal anachronism is literally too late, or the ideal anachronism, what I'm saying here is in terms of what Agamben actually mentioned, that is sometimes it's too soon, it's not feasible but it's in terms of the notion of contemporary, which is which is the important thing we have to really look into. These can be seen as a shady side of a global multiculturalism. It insulates the local in national blend, and it even creates a new form of possible segregation. This is a doubling culture, the other. I think this is another aspect of the abuse of the term contemporary and our exhaustion in the name of contemporary. The essential time found in the local must be transcendently contemporary, then it is not limited to local anymore. It is the anachronism to come where considerable resistance and artistic discretion is placed. I don't know, you may understand what is my point is. My point is there is certain kind of superficially democratizing respect about each local or each region. It brings sort of problem that the local remains a local time in a way. So this is the sort of the actual internal problem of the so-called global multiculturalism. And it is sort of like a respect in terms of either is a symbolic or like a one-liner, like a sort of artistic language. It's totally one-liner, but it's often is respected as in terms of different religion or in terms of different culture, but in a way we already have some sort of our developed common exchanges to debate or articulate in terms of the kind of critical language, how its a resistance either not totally local authoritative power or so in a way in this kind of a protective multiculturalism, it's become another possible segregation. what this idea, somehow this text is a kind of draft, so I have to develop this idea furthermore. Annual report, the title of the 2008 Gwangju Biennial. The artistic director was Okue, for which I was a co-curator with Renji Hoskote, was a research project on contemporary art scene that are at threshold of indeterminacy between an excess and the defiancy. In other words, the art world is busy today, but one can no longer find any direction or focus for artistic progress. This aspect of the art world was particularly highlighted in the section of the 2008 Biennale entitled On the Road, reminiscent of the Jack Kerouac's novel of the same name. This section involved researching and selecting various art exhibitions and cultural events that took place for a period of 4 years prior to the opening of the Biennale in 2008. So the exhibition we brought happened during 2007 and early 2008, and so we kind of bring the exhibition happening all over the world by selecting through our curatorial direction, but it has somehow resonance of the forms, politic of forms, and also there is no such a subject or thematic subject. It's more kind of archaeological research to see what is going on at the moment. The exhibition was meant to be temporal archive of the now and archaeological excavation into our time, what we were standing on the top of. As Renji Hoskote has said, this was a wild journey of the self-discovery, but also a workmanlike survey of development. So this is where the Golden Mata Clocks exhibition was happening in San Francisco, was traveled to Gwangju as edited version. And this is Glenn Lygon, and this is Hansake. In a way, there is nothing, we're not really focused on something new. It's more like we are research about what's going on in the world, and it's we kind of found that there's sort of revisiting of the past history and past achievement, and this is the one exhibition, movement contingency and community. It's actually my exhibition was held in elsewhere in Korea, and it's traveled to also Gwangju. And this is Peter Friedel's. And then there's a lot, but I only brought these kind of 5 images. Unfortunately, our effort for the On the Road were least was not really appreciated in South Korea. The host country, South Korea is the host country of the Gwangju Biennial. It is true that On the Road did not have epoch-making theme. It did not suggest something completely new, and it showed work that had already been shown in various other parts of the world. And the press and art community took little interest in the project. Some went so far as to complain that what we did amounted to inserting them in that exhibition did not even have its own theme, and that exhibition was a regurgitation of other exhibition. In contrast to the close reading of the curatorial direction and the support we received from the overseas media, South Korean reviews viewed our effort as a completely anachronistic. The Korean review, they see it's not. They see this exhibition as a nothing anchored in reality. Well, my point here is not to suggest that the positive evaluation of annual report from the international art community automatically makes it a successful experimental model. My point is that contemporary significance of these attempts, an archaeological look at the present, was passed over entirely in South Korea, and that the meaning of the contemporary was once again fixed to the notion that it must suggest something new and to what is artificially considered future-oriented. Here, I would like to turn to the third aspect of contemporary that Agamben discussed. Contemporaneous inscribes itself in the present by marking it above all as archaic. Only he who perceived the indice and signature of the archaic in the most modern and recent can be contemporary. Archaic means close to the arche, that is to say the origin. But origin is not only situated in a chronological past, it is the contemporary with historical becoming and does not cease to operate within it. An archaeology that does not, however, regress to historical past, but return to the part within the present that we are absolutely incapable of living. What remains unlived there is incessantly sucked back toward the origin without ever being able to reach it. The present is nothing other than this unlived element in everything that is lived. The tension to this unlived is the life of the contemporary. And to be contemporary means, in this sense, to return to a present where we have never been. It is this insight, the third aspect of the contemporary that Agamben discussed, that frames the understanding of not only the archaeology of the present pursued in annual report, but also the many archive and research projects that have become important among artists and curators today, as well as a trend in tendencies in reinterpreting and reapproaching various historical references in today's artistic practices. The contemporaneous in terms of archaic or its relationship to the archetype does not refer simply to a physical age or to work or research that deal directly with the classical or the archaic. Well, for example, the Agamben was mentioned that the image of the high-rise building in New York is automatically bring the image of the ruins. That is also the archaic relation to the in terms of notion of contemporary, not just today's research progress or archival fever. Furthermore, to Agamben, delving into the archaic does not necessarily mean trekking back to the far distant past. The archaic is the present that we cannot experience in the present. Thus, to explore the archaic is to construct a new present through an unexperienced remain of the present. Agamben states that the contemporary put to work a special relationship between the different times by the interpolating the present into the inner homogeneity of the linear time. A work of art begins with a question hanging over the present like a shadow, or with a silver of a clue captured in the middle of the nervousness surrounding the present. It approaches history in an unprecedented way, and thereby inscribe different possibility to the present. When the present and the past are interpolated in the manner in an artist's work, according to a necessity from an exigency to which he cannot respond, we then can say that we are approaching to the contemporary self that is true and responsible to one's time. In this context, the urgency of recording or writing about our recent past is an exigent as the necessity to respond to own time. How long we have? 4 minutes? Okay. Okay, I'm going to go quickly about this exhibition. Well, this exhibition was made in end of 2009, and then also traveled to Rabat, Morocco, 2010. It actually made in the situation of the new government developing the huge developing project. Not only this huge developing project, but also this government historical regression. I mean, I guess like the government itself, it doesn't see it as a historical regression because they think like they developed the country, but it's somehow the whole agenda become very conservative, and they brought sort of ideology of the development in 70s kind of with the type of the 70s and 60s, 70s, 80s in. So for me, this is kind of a criticism about the situation, but it's not just as criticism or reactionary criticism. It's somehow I was interested to see this desire of the developer, which is sort of the archaically, it's originally we found we can find it this desire in the modern in our ideology of modernity also. So when the 18th century, the Goethe's Faust has sort of the scene of this developer's drive. This is kind of poetically written lines in the Faust. And it has a sort of lots of images of the how they developing the country, and then human lives were sacrificed, and then there's a dam, and there's a canals and built it, and so it has a lots of. It's a very similar situation what is going on in contemporary many Asian countries like China and Korea. And then Orkui Energy's term, andromodernity, this is the one of the term that I inspired for this exhibition. And according to him, the modern, well, he mentioned this term in his article, Modernity and Postcolonial Ambivalence, where Korea, China, and like India, they have a sort of pursuit of the supermodernity, which is the first world Western model of the modernizations, but it's designating this developing modernity as in Asia as andromodernity, meaning a hybrid form of modernity found especially in countries like China, India, South Korea, and such modernity is achieved through the kind of accelerated development, while also devising alternative model of development. What he said alternative, but it's a kind of hybrid model adopted by Asian region. It is understood embody very masculine traits, since its principal emphasis is on development of modernization. In most East Asian countries, it has been reinforced through the incorporation of the deep-rooted patriarchal tradition. Thus, it is noted the main discourse of the state is centered on heterosexuality, masculinity, and feminism. Well, this is totally the agenda of a mainstream we found in Korean society too. The mainstream society that is found, that is built it by this 70s, 80s development agenda. So I invited several artists to, their work has this resonance of the sort of hollow development project is going on, and then there, and the one of artists, Heidi Vogel, he did a research project in Seoul, And what she found during her stay, there's a sort of collective melancholy in the society, because the society, they always blow up everything and then building something new. So the people kind of lost their memory to reside. So it becomes sort of the people's collective melancholy. So she kind of researched about this people's story, and then through the interview, and it's kind of the man who working for a small manufacturer factory. He's there's a kind of totally removed small manufacturer factory to the outside of the city. It was previously located in the center of the city, the nearby Cheonggye rivulet. So she also follows some of the small narrative about these people and how they relate to this kind of disappearance, and it's a rebuilding by government force, but it's absolutely disappearance for the people who had to live in the society. This is a part-time suite project. They're also this work is also discuss about this kind of collective melancholia. They're the young people who around late 20 or early 30. They, in such a landscape of this huge, never stopping development, and the younger people, they're kind of getting more marginalized from this scene. So they made this performance, the walking on the edge of the rooftop. Their sounds came out quite melancholy music as a background music. And some of people might remind that this is quite similar in the 60s, Justin Church Group's performance in the, like Trisha Brown's performance on the rooftop. But they actually, these people, they're totally ignorant about history, but they're sort of, I mean, in a way, what I interested is without knowing, it's, in a way, the history is kind of repeating, and also there is a very universally traveled situations and found in a different time frame. So the artists, what they try to interrupt the ongoing scene, like when the Trisha Brown did the performance, it was the time when the New York was highly developed as a new metro, as a huge cosmopolitan city. So there's a building going on, and then the kind of these dangerous rooftop become her own space to engagement. And there's a Siren Eunyoung Chung. She researched about the woman theater, which is a tradition. There is a traditional theater is revised as a woman theater in end of 50 and early 60. There was quite famous theater for the around that time, but it's now it's a really retrograde, and there's not much fandom around it. But it has a huge fandom around that time, and it is the, you know, the woman. There's only actress if they play the woman and the man at the same time. So there's a sort of queerness around this theater. So the people And then the fandom around this woman theater is 여성국극, and it is the artist reveals sort of the unrevealed queerness of the modernization in Korean society. Okay, I think you can see this several other video works later on. There's Eunyoung's work and the Minuk Lim's SOS. There is Minuk Lim's SOS has a performance theater, which is happening in the riverbank. Actually, that riverbank was the one part of the huge development project in city. And it has also resonance like these undoers who make their life drifting from this mainstream society narrative. Thank you very much, and I've finished now.
Thank you, Hyunjin, very much. Are there any urgent questions right now or comments? I would have, well, maybe we actually like move towards this side of the room first to. I do have a question actually, just. No, because you give this very interesting framework on the notion of contemporary, but I just wanted to ask you, how would you relate that to contemporary art and to the system of contemporary art? Because there's, I think, a very important and defining paradox there. Because on one hand, the very system of contemporary art is constitutively dependent on absolute synchronicity towards in the whole world. It cannot exist as a global system without having imposed at some point in these decades an absolute simultaneity. However, paradoxically, and I think this is an important source of conflict both discursively and effectively in the field of contemporary art, the way it frames its actions in this system that again depends on synchronicity is actually based on a multiculturalist logics. The way in which it operates, its exchanges inside this hardware relies on an opposing logics.
Yeah. Well, I know it's difficult question also for myself as a curator, but for myself I think the research process is very important in terms of the globalism. There shouldn't be as a just like a superficial democratizing domain. So whenever I do some research in other countries or other local, first time I always try to approach it without double standard. So I have actually a lot of experience. Like it takes a long time to really find out sort of the language that I expect as what is notion of contemporary, or in terms of the contemporary that I see. It is quite difficult to find out in the first attempt in the research. But so it's like an onion, like you have to peel out all the skin and go in deep, and then there is certain, it's a very localized artist in a way, but he or her work has rather more contemporary than any elsewhere in like London or Paris or in elsewhere in the first world or. So I also experienced in Tokyo also, in a way I sort of researched through the artists and this kind of invisible network, and then you can find it's very local artist, and he has no, he's not speaking at all none of the English, but his work is absolutely the contemporary more than any other. So somehow when you approach it to the agenda with the multiculturalism, you may research it. During the research, like you might trying to find sort of the what is the political situation in terms of Japan society, or what is the urgency here is, and then that topic is raised first, and then the topic is important in a way to access the certain kind of to see the differences of society or the differences of localization, but in a way it become another trap to encapsulate your idea up to this topic or subject-wise. So, but the art practice is not that didactically respond to the actual socio-political situation and whatsoever. It's in a way it's somehow it's important to have a balance actually. I don't know and in a way it requires certain kind of discretion for myself all the time. Like either it has to be designated whether it might have a sort of manipulative relation to its political engagement or any kind of opportunistic agenda to the emerging sort of tendencies or and how it is important artists to engage to it, and also through the older local institution, but in a way, as we see like through the Agambem's text, it's not always like that simple. It's in a way there's a certain darkness is always not visible, but there is. So that's what I also learned a lot during the research trip together with Opry Energy. We kind of trying to really go deep in the local, but I mean there's a research trip is always limited in a short period of time, like only several days. It's immensely difficult to know what is actually the scene. Or the local situations. I mean, it's not like a newspaper that report everything through the newspaper. So, so the locals is somehow it has to be. It has some way. There is a way to access, but there's some way there is a the blockage to in terms of certain practice, which is very precisely contemporary, but it's locally segregated. Yeah. So that's what I experienced, and then that somehow I always careful for myself not to ignore about this that situation.
Thank you very much.